some fucking golf music, Tyler. Oh, listen to that golf. Yes, it does suck. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Stokastic MLB Strategy Show. If you're just coming in now, which I assume you are, only like Sean V is here hours in advance of the show, but like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. We've got an 8-game slate to break down for tonight. There's also a 3-game afternoon slate. If there's interest, Ab and I could briefly touch on that at the end. If you guys aren't interested in it, that works too. But if you guys have any questions on that, we'll save that for the end of the show. But 8-game slate tonight. Last night was an interesting one, Adam, because Shohei Ohtani ended up not being optimal, which seemed like there was a pretty good chance of it happening heading into the slate. How did last night go for you?
Pretty much broke even. Started out really well because I ended up with a lot of Milwaukee and a lot of Pittsburgh. So I just had multiple lineups at the top of tournaments kind of waiting for the Padres to get going, and then the Padres did get going. So, just broke even. It was kind of frustrating because obviously if the Padres had failed, I would have been in really good shape. But that's how it goes.
Often is the case. If the team that's very chalky that we didn't play scores less runs, it typically goes better.
When you score more points than other people, you win.
Yeah, it was at least the one good thing is most of the damage done by San Diego was done by Brandon Drury, who was the only player in the lineup that I was overweight to because he was like 5% owned and everybody else was crazy popular. But yeah, last night's slate, I wish I would have had the balls to have not played Ohtani in single entry. I was really considering the best ways to be contrarian last night. And that was one thing that crossed my mind is like, maybe I just don't play Ohtani in single entry. And not that he was bad or anything, but that would have been a massive way to differentiate lineup. So
yeah, for me, it was Pirates.
Yeah, which also I think was a sensible way to go about it. Instead, I played a fairly chalky lineup, which did good, but not great. And the other iteration of the lineup I would have built without Ohtani that I was considering would have done really well. But live and learn. On to today's slate. And
one other thing with Ohtani, and obviously you realize this, but like him scoring 18 points or whatever, this is just for chat because you get so many conversations about, like what pitchers need to win. You could still, in theory, win with Ohtani. Like maybe not last night. I don't even know if he was in the winning lineup or not, but like on a normal size slate where, there's less combinations covered. Like you're almost never making the optimal lineup in baseball. Like 18 points from a pitcher. Yeah, it's not what you were looking for from Ohtani, but you still certainly could be in contention with that.
Yeah, he wasn't bad last night. It was just there was better pitchers for cheaper that were also much less owned. And I mean, he was 86% owned in single entry last night. So if I would, I kind of knew that was going to be the case, but I try to convince myself it isn't because I just want to play the guys I want to play sometimes. So I'm sitting there, I'm looking at my lineup. It's like, yeah, maybe Ohtani won't be in every single lineup. And then he was in every single lineup. It was like, yeah, I should have expected that to be the case. But we've got today's slate to talk about, and we're opening up with one of your favorite pitchers, Adam, but he's on a different team now. Noah Syndergaard, now on the Philadelphia Phillies, going up against a very, very terrible Washington Nationals lineup. They no longer have Juan Soto. They no longer have Josh Bell. It figures to be a pretty shitty team moving forward. So now Noah Syndergaard, the strikeouts haven't been there for him this year. He gives up all kinds of stolen bases. I know you love loading up against Noah Syndergaard, but what are you going to do when it's this Nationals lineup against him?
I doubt I get to much of Washington. I do think if you have Robles and Garcia at the top of the order, you can certainly go to those guys. Robles will run. Garcia is not actually a bad hitter, and he's only 3K. But yeah, I mean, the Nats are definitely going to push it in terms of how bad of a team am I willing to go to against Syndergaard.
Yeah, and then the other thing with the Nationals is whenever Syndergaard's pitching, I love to look at stolen base props to see like, all right, what advantages are there? Victor Robles is plus 200 to steal a base today, like one of the lowest odds I've seen him the entire season. So it seems like books are kind of catching on to the fact that, hey, it's really easy to steal bases against Noah Syndergaard.
I guess they got tired of Draft Cheat taking 20K off them every time Syndergaard pitches.
Yeah, well, also their same game parlays are kind of weirdly broken. Like you try to put certain combinations together and the odds don't change, and then other ones get like multiplied by weird ways. I don't know. The whole single game parlay is broken, and then stolen base odds haven't really been great at being posted by them this year. So I think that Syndergaard, there is definite opportunity for speedsters like Victor Robles to have more fantasy upside than the field might realize. But as for Syndergaard as a pitcher, he's also going to be pretty popular. He's projected for 25% ownership on DK. FanDuel is projected for 16% ownership. So he's actually the most popular projected pitcher right now on FanDuel. How are you going to handle Syndergaard? Because I know you generally tend to like to stack against him, but this is a very easy matchup and he's fairly cheap.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good spot. It's still not a great strikeout spot, I don't think, but he is cheap, like you said, getting 25% ownership at 7,600 on DraftKings. That makes sense. The other thing, too, is when you look at other pitchers in that price range, like Jeffrey Springs is getting even more ownership at 7,100. Nick Pivetta getting about half the ownership at 8,200. So it's not like there's guys in that price range that you would really want to go to that aren't getting ownership. So I think I'll probably end up just getting some Syndergaard because it's an 8-game slate and a pretty good matchup. One other thing I did want to mention on the Washington side, because I didn't know until I looked just now, Kiba Ruiz actually has 5 stolen bases this year. He's always kind of a decent catching option just because it's catcher and he's cheap, but he can actually steal bases. That makes him look pretty good.
All right, let's do a quick look up here. What is Keibert Ruiz's prop for stolen bases? Something else to talk about too is Syndergaard while I'm looking at this, and why I would almost never want to play a chalky Syndergaard. Look at the pitchers on this slate. There are not very many good options to choose from.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I was getting to with the other pitchers around him getting ownership as well. It would be one thing if it was, like, oh, well, Syndergaard's getting 25% and I can play Springs at 15%. I'm not saying Springs is like over-owned or anything. I'm just saying the ownership's already there on him as well. Same for Pivetta. Like if you're looking for lower owned pivots around Syndergaard, Sonny Gray, 8,300 at 6%, but like he's facing Toronto, so certainly isn't going to project that well. Chris Bubich at 6,100, getting 2%, but I mean, the guy's not very good. So it's just really tough to point to any pitching on this slate that you would pivot to that is in that price range and not already getting ownership that you would have confidence in.
So Keibert Ruiz plus 550 to steal a base. They've got these juiced. I mean, they do not want to get screwed by Noah Syndergaard getting bases stolen against him on. I mean, Ruiz has, 5 stolen? So he's averaging a stolen base once every 20 games, and he's plus 550 tonight. Obviously, it's a good stolen base matchup, but there are just not good odds being posted against Syndergaard. I mean, for reference, there was a Syndergaard start a month ago where I got Jose Altuve at plus 550 to steal a base against him. Now that's the number on Keibert Ruiz for tonight. Other side of the game, Paulo Espino is on the mound for the Nationals, and the Phillies have the highest implied team total of the entire slate, nearly 6 runs going up against Espino. So we're seeing Syndergaard, at least per the books, is expected to pitch well, and then the offense also expected to have a good amount of success. As a result, the Philadelphia Phillies, by far the most popular team on the slate, projected for nearly 17% ownership. Do you think this amount of chalk is warranted on them?
I think as long as you find ways to balance it out, because I think it is a very good spot. Espino, just not a particularly good pitcher. So far this year, 238 expected ISO to righties, 194 to lefties. Schwarber looks extremely good. Hoskins looks good. Derek Hall looks good. Obviously, you can't play them together on DraftKings. Real Muto and Castellanos. I mean, Castellanos is having a bad year, but when you make him $3,200, that kind of alleviates most of the concerns about if there's, what's wrong with him. Is there actually anything wrong with him, or is it just fluky or whatever? At 3,200, I don't care. There's just kind of nothing but upside there on Castellanos. So, yeah, it looks like a good team. You have Gene Segura back. That, lengthens the lineup a bit as well. So I understand why the ownership's coming in there. Right now in the top stacks tool, we have them with a 12% top stack percentage, but also an 11% chance of being the top value stack. So when you combine those two things together, I think the ownership's actually pretty reasonable.
Yeah, and then what actually the Castellanos price kind of reminds me of? What was it, 2 days ago? We had the Giolito start against the Royals, where people are like, well, Giolito's been no good this year. And the counter is, well, yeah, but he's priced for how he's played this year. And that's kind of what we have with Castellanos now. Would I want to play Castellanos right now at 5,000 where he's been in previous years? No. Just like I wouldn't play Lucas Giolito at 10,000 where he's been in previous years. But there's a price where it makes sense. And now I do think we have a point where Castellanos is priced like any below average outfielder now.
Yeah, exactly. Like this season, 322 plate appearances against right-handed pitching for Castellanos, only a 295 expected WOBA and a 149 expected ISO. That's awful. But 3,200 is a pretty reasonable salary for that when you're hitting, 5th or 6th on a team with a 5.5 implied run total. But if you go back to like the start of 2020, Castellanos has a 347 expected WOBA, 214 expected ISO. So it's kind of just like, okay, either he's correctly priced if he just is what he is at this point, or what I think is probably more likely, he figures it out. Like if you're talking about the same hitter he's been his whole career, he's wildly underpriced.
Yeah, totally agree. And if we had to guess, is he going to be more or less expensive moving forward? I would say more expensive. There's definitely been a long track record of him being successful. And I think he's more likely not to figure it out as we get on throughout the course of the season.
King of Smack said Noah Ark is going to drown and then told me to call him crazy. you'll never get an argument from me if your take is that Noah Syndergaard's going to suck.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard over the course of 150 lineups to not get some exposure to him. I doubt I get to the 25%. I haven't built lineups yet, but that is my best guess, is that I'll be well short of the 25% number that we currently haven't projected for.
I'm just glad I don't hand build lineups because it would be really difficult to actually click his name, but I'll just let the computer do it for me.
And if you guys want to get updated ownership later on the day on Noah Syndergaard and all the other players on the slate, as well as stuff like top stack odds, top pitcher odds, top batter odds, all of the different tools we have over at Stokastic.com, you can sign up for a Stokastic Plus Platinum membership right now, and you get 50% off your first week if you sign up using the promo code MLB Strategy Show. That's all one word, all capital letters, MLB Strategy Show. That is going to get you 50% off all of the tools you need to build winning MLB DFS lineups. And that's also going to include all of the tools and projections we have for every single other sport out there. So stuff like NFL preseason, that's starting today. We're going to have NFL preseason projections. So that's also going to be included. So if you want access to all of this, get yourself 50% off. Sign up using that promo code MLB Strategy Show. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Stokastic Plus today. All right, next game, it is the Houston Astros against the Cleveland Guardians. Justin Verlander on the hill for Houston. And the strikeouts haven't been the same this year as it was in previous years, but on the whole, he has been ridiculously good. He's now a fairly significant favorite to win the American League Cy Young Award, which makes sense with Shane McClanahan kind of starting to drop off in recent starts. In terms of the other pitchers on the slate, I think Verlander is pretty clearly the top option. Are you surprised to see he's not currently projected for more ownership?
Maybe a little bit, especially because like I get it that Cleveland's a tough strikeout matchup, but when you look at the other top end pitchers, Manoah's got a relatively difficult matchup against Minnesota. Carrasco's got a dangerous matchup against Atlanta. So it's not like you're pointing to any of those guys. Kyle Wright's facing the Mets. So it's not like you're pointing to any of those guys and saying, you're like, oh, this spot's a lot better. And Verlander is certainly a very good pitcher. 25.6% strikeout percentage, down from where it's been previously, but still 3.47 xFIP. So I am a little surprised that he's not getting more ownership, but at the same time, maybe it just has to do with wanting to pay up for bats. And then you do also have a pretty solid mid-range when you have, Syndergaard against the Nats, and you have Springs against Detroit, and you have Pivetta against Kansas City.
Yeah, the ownership's pretty spread out today. We've got Pivetta, you mentioned him. He's picking up some ownership. Syndergaard, Springs, Carrasco, Manoah, Verlander. Those guys are all in like that 15 to 30% range. Nobody's north of 30%. Springs being the most popular right at the 30% mark. And then over on FanDuel, it's a lot of the same guys, and they're all grouped in like 8 to 15% owned. So it does look like, at least as of right now, the ownership's going to be pretty spread out. Maybe the changes later on in the day, but at least as of now, I like Justin Verlander a lot at this current ownership.
Agreed. Yeah, like it's because the thing is, like, even though he's relatively expensive at 10.4, he's still, you can pair him with like Springs or pair him with Syndergaard, and you're still spending like 18K. So you're still gonna be able to pretty much get the bats that you want with Syndergaard.
Yeah, and then in lineups that don't have Syndergaard, it's going to be pretty easy to pay up for pitching because you can just mix in some of those cheap bats for the Nationals, like a Victor Robles. You mentioned Keibert Ruiz, and then you have a pretty realistic chance somebody gets a single, steals second base, maybe they score a run, and all of a sudden you got a great value game there. So I think that's something that's also going to make it really easy to spend up for pitching, like Verlander today. Any interest in stacking against him?
No, not particularly. Ramirez is still expensive. I thought maybe we would get a little bit of a pricing discount given the matchup, but we didn't. So, I mean, pretty tough to get there. Like, even though his strikeout percentage is down a bit this year, as I'd said, he's still pitching really well. Sub 100 expected ISO to lefties for Verlander, 178 to righties with a 24% strikeout percentage. So he's actually kind of been a little bit reverse splits this year, but there's not a whole lot of right-handed power in this lineup anyway. It's just a spot that I think is going to be very difficult to get to.
And then what do you make of the Houston Astros lineup? It is a little bit stronger now post-trade deadline, adding Christian Vasquez and Trey Mancini to the lineup. They have a decent matchup against Zach Plesac in terms of ownership, projected to be just south of 10% owned on the aggregate, and that's also pretty much exactly what their top stack odds are. Is this a high priority team for you to get to in your stacks?
I like Houston a lot right now, especially with them getting like half the ownership of Philadelphia. I had said I understand why Philly's getting it, and I think they deserve it. Houston clearly not on the same level in terms of value, and they are behind them in top stack percentage as well. But this is a really deep lineup now. We had kind of run into the issue with Houston recently where it was like, 1 through 5 or so was just really, really good hitters, but they were typically pretty expensive. And then 6 through 9 was just mediocre guys that you didn't really want outside of the fact that they were really cheap. Now that's turned into a 3K Trey Mancini with first base and outfield eligibility. So that's one way you can balance out the salaries. Gurriel's still hitting second at 3,300. He's not the ideal guy that you want at first base, but it's still a cheap way to get to an Astros stack. Vasquez as a catcher, that's certainly a better hitting catcher option than Maldonado, although Maldonado did win me a GPP recently with 2 home runs, but that was not expected at all. So it's a lineup where they're not exorbitantly priced. Alvarez and Altuve are cheap or are expensive, but like nobody else in the lineup is above 5K. And then now it's just there's more combinations you can make where you're not playing, Chas McCormick or whoever else they were throwing in their outfield at different times. So I do like Houston quite a bit. I think they're a team I'm going to be playing more as the year goes on. One, mostly just because of how much deeper the lineup is now, and two, because if Trey Mancini's price does not quickly change, I'm going to be rostering that guy constantly when he's in Houston.
I think yesterday afternoon, he was one of the more popular value plays on the slate, but it makes sense. He's just not really priced appropriately. It's weird. He's gotten cheaper playing for the Houston Astros than he did when he's with the Orioles. And it's just it's a much better lineup he's a part of, better chance for accounting stats, and probably chance for one extra plate appearance or so.
Yeah. Well, and also, Houston is just catered for where he hits home runs, or where he hits fly balls, I should say.
What is it to left field there?
310, 315.
Yeah, it's crazy short.
Compared
I
to
do
like
think
370 or whatever in Baltimore.
Yeah, Mancini should be, especially with the new ballpark dimensions they have over there, Mancini should be considerably better, I think, in Houston overall as a fantasy asset. Next game we have here, the Atlanta Braves and the New York Mets. Pretty fun rivalry matchup here. Braves only a couple games behind the Mets in the standings. Pitching matchup, Kyle Wright and Carlos Carrasco. So these two pitchers are projected for 18% ownership over on DK for Carlos Carrasco. Given the outlook of the pitching on the slate, a little surprised maybe that Kyle Wright's only projected for 2% ownership. Not to say I think he was going to be popular, but 2% seems really low and an easy number to get overweight to in tournaments. Do you see Kyle Wright as a viable contrarian pitching option?
Yeah, just because he's getting like no ownership right now, 3% compared to, Manoah at 18, Carrasco at 18, Verlander at 29. Lower probability than those guys, but not by that much. We have Verlander as a 25% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, Manoah and Carrasco around 20%, Wright at 16. It's a really difficult matchup. The Mets don't strike out a lot. They have a lot of good hitters. Kyle Wright has been pretty solid this year. He's come back to earth a little bit, but a 24% strikeout percentage, 3.36 xFIP. He's not somebody that I'm building around and planning on prioritizing, but he is somebody where if you're going to say the Phillies, a popular stack, and you want a high upside pitcher, but you don't want to take on all the ownership of Verlander, I think that's where somebody like Wright fits in.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. Some of those chalky stacks, particularly in a Philadelphia Phillies lineup, that's one of the more reasonable ways to differentiate a pitcher, going to Kyle Wright, who nobody is really rostering. You mentioned this before. His strikeout rate has dipped a little bit as the season's gone on. This is a pitcher who was formerly a top pitching prospect, had no success in the big leagues at all prior to this year. Now he's been a legitimate middle to top of the rotation starter. Are the Mets a team that you're looking to get to against him at all?
They're middle of the road for me. We have them with a 4.5% chance of being the top stack, 3% projected ownership. I mentioned he has come back to earth a little bit as the year has gone on, and I think that was to be expected just based on how well he started off. But overall this year, 167 expected ISO to lefties, 109 to righties. You can always stack the Mets in tournaments at low ownership just because they're really good. And this is only an 8-game slate, so it makes it a little bit easier to kind of just throw darts at good offenses that are getting low ownership in relatively tough spots. But I wouldn't say that they're a priority for me. They're also expensive, which doesn't help.
Yeah, Mets, very expensive, especially the core guys, the guys we really want to roster: Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, a couple of the more expensive hitters on the slate, and also their pitcher, one of the more expensive pitchers going today, Carlos Carrasco against the Atlanta Braves. He's projected for about 18% ownership on DK. Over on FanDuel, sitting at 10% ownership. So one of the more popular pitching plays on both slates, or both sites, I should say. And I know he has the third best top pitcher odds for us on the slate today, but it's hard for me to want to play him all that frequently because it is a pretty tough matchup against the Braves. I think there's other pitchers I just generally prefer getting to.
I like both sides here. The pitching is weak enough on this slate that I think I get to Carrasco at 9,100. There are strikeouts in the Braves lineup. He is a pretty good strikeout pitcher. 23% strikeout percentage this year, 3.52 xFIP. Overall, he's been solid, and the price here at 9,100 isn't bad. But it's also like you were saying, it's also a really dangerous spot against an Atlanta team that has plenty of power. They're not as dangerous a lineup as they were earlier in the year without Albies and without Duvall, but Acuna, Swanson, Olsen, Riley, Contreras, these guys are all really good. You add in whatever Rosario and Ozuna and Arcia are, and they're kind of whatever, but it's still a dangerous lineup. As far as splits go this year, Carrasco's held righties to a 107 expected ISO. That doesn't mean I don't want to play Acuna and Swanson and Riley. Like, these guys are clearly above average hitters with a lot of power, but lefties have a 200 expected ISO against him. Matt Olson in particular really stands out here at 5,100.
Yeah, so we've got the Braves do look about appropriately on 5% ownership, 6% top stack. I don't think it's a team to ignore at all in large field tournaments. If I was building one lineup and had to pick a side, Carrasco or the Braves, I guess I'd lean a little bit more towards the Braves. But ultimately, I think it probably is going to be a spot I'm going to have to get some exposure to both sides in mass entry, just because the Braves are one of the better offenses on the slate and Carrasco is one of the better pitchers. To the point you made before, I have to keep in mind that there just aren't that many good pitching options to get to. So there's nothing I think that's a crazy high priority in this game, though, relative to the other options on the slate.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Next game we have here, and this is going to be a pitcher that is going to be a very high priority for a lot of people. Tampa Bay Rays against the Detroit Tigers. Jeffrey Springs has a 26% K rate this year. He has quietly been a really solid starting pitcher and is just not getting priced as such on DraftKings. Only a $7,100 salary. Over on FanDuel, Springs is priced at $7,400. If I'm picking one pitcher to roster in the mid-range, it's going to be Springs over Noah Syndergaard. I know the field kind of agrees because Springs is slightly more popular, but I think there's a bigger gap than what the ownership projections show right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mentioned Springs when we talked about Syndergaard, that he's getting 30% ownership. So it's not like you can point to him as like a lower owned pivot. But that being said, I do think the ownership gap should be a little bit bigger. You have Springs coming in with a 25.4% strikeout percentage as a starter this year, 3.43 xFIP, facing the Tigers. They have plenty of right-handed bats in their lineup, but most of them aren't very good. And against righties this year, Springs actually has a strikeout percentage 5 points higher than he does against lefties at 27.5%, 282 expected WOBA, 152 expected ISO. He has a changeup he throws 44% of the time with a 22% swinging strike percentage against righties. So there's a good reason for him being reverse splits. And you're comparing that to Noah Syndergaard, who has an 18.9% strikeout percentage, so like 7 points lower. 4.28 xFIP is nearly a full run higher. They're both facing below average offenses. There's more strikeouts, I think, in the Tigers lineup. I don't really know why, and Springs is less expensive. I don't really know why they are basically getting the same ownership. I think Syndergaard should be relatively popular. I think Springs should be more popular.
Yeah, I think Springs should be the most popular pitcher on the slate by a pretty wide margin, just considering his price point, the other pitchers on the slate, what he opens up for you in terms of lineup construction. The matchup also against the Tigers, they have an implied team total south of 4 runs, only 3.8 right now. So I really do like getting to Springs. On the other side of the Detroit Tigers, they have been better against lefties than righties, but I don't know that's enough for me to want to stack them.
Yeah, pretty tough sell just because Springs has been so good. It is a park downgrade for him getting out of Tropicana, but Baez's price tag also came up. Eric Haas at 3,900 would probably be the easiest guy for me to get to here just because he is a catcher. He does have some power. Riley Green, if he were cheaper, maybe I'd be interested. Like Springs has, I mentioned him being reverse splits. Springs has allowed a 194 expected ISO with only a 22% strikeout percentage against lefties this year. So it wouldn't be shocking if Green gets to him, but I'm also not going out of my way to play a 4K Riley Green at outfield when there's like 100 good outfielders.
And then starting for the Tigers, it is Drew Hutchison on the mound. Just has not been good this year. 4.53 ERA, 5 expected ERA. And that's with more than half of his appearances coming out of the bullpen. So a lot of red flags when it comes to Hutchison. The Tampa Bay Rays have been a little bit banged up on offense. So the team has struggled over the last month or so, but still an implied team total of about 5 runs going up against a weak pitcher in Hutchison. I think this is a team that's a fairly high priority to stack.
Especially the way things look right now. We actually have them on DraftKings with a higher top value percentage than Philadelphia, an 11% top stack percentage, so just 1 point behind the Phillies, and getting like 2/3 the ownership in the aggregate that Philadelphia is. So with the way that looks, at least at the moment, I think that the Rays look really, really good because like you can compare them to that other, top team in terms of stack probability, and they're not getting as much ownership as they deserve. Hutchison has struggled to both sides of the plate this year. 196 expected ISO with a 12% strikeout percentage against righties. 155 expected ISO, 19.5% strikeout percentage against lefties. So he has been a little bit better there. But Brandon Lau, 5K, that looks really good. Rosa Reyna looks really good. Choi's pretty cheap. We know Paredes has power. Jose Siri's in here at 2K flat now. I do like this team. It's a park upgrade for them going into Detroit, getting out of Tropicana Field. Not that Detroit's the most home run friendly park, but it is a pretty decent place to hit overall. So I like the Rays here, especially if their ownership continues to come in at like 2/3 of Philadelphia's.
Yeah. So if I was building lineups right now, they would be one of my two most rostered stacks. There's another one that's going to be a contrarian team we're going to talk about in a little bit, but this looks like a really good spot to the Rays. The ownership is not too crazy. So high priority for me. I really like getting to Tampa Bay. Next game here, Toronto Blue Jays, Minnesota Twins. Alek Manoah is on the mound. He's coming off a fairly disappointing start against the Detroit Tigers. He was getting hit harder than we would have liked to see. And then the start ended with him taking a line drive and having to leave the game early. So that was also something that kind of cut into his fantasy impact. Not that he was going to pitch another 3 innings or anything like that after that, but it did definitely cut into his fantasy point total a little bit. But today, a much tougher matchup against the Minnesota Twins. Alek Manoah as a pay-up option is picking up some ownership today, but not all that much, considering the tough matchup and on the road in Minnesota. How do you see yourself handling Manoah as a pitcher?
I think he looks fine in tournaments. He's similar to Carrasco for me, where just because of a lack of options, I expect that I'll be getting to him just because I'm not expecting to play like 100% Verlander, Spring, Syndergaard combinations. But it is a scary matchup. He is a good pitcher, not great strikeout stuff, 22.5% strikeout percentage, 3.85 xFIP, but it's also a really scary matchup against Minnesota, a team that has, plenty of power in their lineup. You have Arias, who's really difficult to strike out. Correa, we know, is really good. Buxton's fantastic. Polanco's good. Miranda's a top hitting prospect. Nick Gordon's been hitting the shit out of the ball all season long. So it's a pretty dangerous spot to get to, but he is only getting 18% ownership, which seems pretty reasonable to me, given that we have him with a 20% chance of being top 2.
Yeah. And I mean, relative to the other, like, I do think there's a gap between Verlander and then Manoah and Carrasco, but then you just get to a point where it's like, all right, Kyle Wright, Carrasco, Manoah, those guys kind of go together. To me, Kyle Wright, the lowest probability of those guys, but also much lower owned. Manoah, I do think, is a better real life pitcher than Carrasco, so I'd be willing to take some shots there, but I would be concerned if this is a very lefty heavy lineup for the Twins, because Manoah has really struggled to strike out lefties this season.
Yeah, he has. That's a fair point as well. Only a 16.9% strikeout percentage to lefties compared to 29% to righties. Not giving up power to either side. Sub 100 expected ISO to righties, 138 to lefties. But you are going to get a pretty balanced at worst lineup for Minnesota. The projected lineup I'm looking at right now has 5 lefties, and then of the righties, you're talking about Correa, Buxton, being 2 of them. So definitely a scary spot for Manoah.
Yeah. And then on the other side of the game, are you going to be looking to stack the Twins at all? Because I think we could use some of the lefties potentially as one-offs just because Manoah is allowing contact to them. But I don't know that I want to be going crazy making full-out 5-man stacks against them.
Yeah, same boat. Minnesota's a high enough upside offense that I don't mind getting to them here and there, but I'm not going out of my way to target Manoah on a slate that has pitching as bad as this one does.
And then starting for the Twins, Sonny Gray is on the mound. And I'm going to pull up some of the splits because off the top of my head, he's been quite a bit less effective as of late. His numbers overall for the year are solid. He also has a very difficult matchup against the Toronto Blue Jays. So here, Sonny Gray splits by month. Yeah, so in the month of July, Sonny Gray had a 4.56 FIP, a 4.6 xFIP. Also saw a big dip in his strikeout rate, only 18.3% K rate in July, also 16.4% in June. So good start to the year, and then much less effective as of late. Sonny Gray also spent a lot of time on the injured list. Maybe that's something that's affecting him right now. But it's hard for me to be all that enthused about rostering him given the dip in strikeouts over the last couple of months.
Yeah, that is kind of inflated by the fact that he didn't strike out a single guy against the Rangers 4 starts ago. Other than that, he's kind of been okay. 5 strikeouts in 5 innings last time out, 7 and 6 against Detroit 2 starts ago, 3 in 3 and 2/3, 6 and 4 and 2/3. Actually, no, 0 and 4 and 2/3, 5 and 5. So like I still think he's been okay. I do expect his strikeout numbers to go up as the season goes on, but this is also a really difficult matchup for him against Toronto. So I kind of mentioned him earlier, where of the pitchers not getting much ownership, he's certainly one of the most talented, him along with Kyle Wright. But it's also really difficult to go into a slate and say like, oh yeah, I'm just going to load in a bunch of Sonny Gray against one of the best offenses in baseball. It's more likely that I'm going to, in most lineups, just play pitchers that project better. But Gray is certainly in that Kyle Wright category, where if I have like a Philly stack and I don't know, popular one-offs, and I don't want 20-something% owned pitchers, you're still getting a lot of talent with Sonny Gray. You're going to have a very high ceiling in that lineup. It's just a lot less likely to come to fruition.
Yeah. Although if I had to pick one side, I do prefer the Toronto Blue Jays. I don't know that I'm going to ultimately end up needing to get to Sonny Gray, but I'm pretty positive I'm going to like the Toronto Blue Jays, just because, like I said, still the numbers over the last month for Sonny Gray, they are more showing of a mediocre pitcher than a high-end pitcher. The Toronto Blue Jays only picking up 5% ownership with nearly 8% top stack odds. So we are seeing top stack odds for the Blue Jays comparable to a team like the Houston Astros, only about a percentage point and a half behind, but the Astros are nearly double the ownership. So I do look at the Blue Jays. They are a little pricey. It's an expensive stack, but I think the ownership makes it a team worth paying up for to be a little contrarian.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn here because the top stack percentage just seems a little bit high to me. But at the same time, Toronto is certainly an offense that I don't mind playing when they're not getting much ownership, and they're not getting much ownership at 5%. So I'm kind of torn because I think Sonny Gray is a good pitcher. I'm not as concerned about him as you are, or even how, I think he's better than he's pitched this year. He has dealt with injuries, like you said, but even this year, 3.73 xFIP, 138 expected ISO to righties, 108 to lefties. He really just has not been bad this year. So I don't feel comfortable going to Toronto, but at the same time, this is a really good offense that isn't getting ownership. So I think Toronto is just kind of in the same category as like the Braves for me.
Yeah, I think I have a little bit more interest in Toronto than the Braves, but I hear what you're saying. Either way, Toronto, that's a team I'm going to almost certainly be overweight to in tournaments, unless their ownership was to come up, throughout the course of the day. But I don't think that's going to be the case against Sonny Gray. So Toronto, a team that I like. Any other talking points for you from this game?
No, but even EMAC is burying Sean V in chat.
Oh my God.
That's brutal.
What happened here? Where is EMAC? I can't even find the. What did Sean V do today?
I haven't really been paying a ton of attention. I think he was victory
Oh,
lapping some combination of James Caprillion and.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, got here late. Sean V already victory lapping him, calling the fifth best starting pitcher on a 4-game slate. That does appear to be what's going on, EMAC. He is taking some victory laps in there. Yes, I said 18 DK fantasy points for Caprillion. He got 7. Cool. He had no utility last night. There's a lot of better starting pitchers. There we go. All right. He almost got his fantasy points correct. It is what it is. By the way, today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you guys have not signed up at Prize Picks yet, you want to do it using the promo code OSMO, because it's going to get you up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. You could also use the tools that we have over at Stokastic to help build some player prop cards over at Prize Picks. So stuff like using Odd Shopper and looking at our player prop projections and seeing the percentage chance of each one either going over or under what their number is. Really, really valuable stuff when building those prop cards over at Prize Picks. But also just don't forget to sign up using that promo code OSMO, because you're going to get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And why would you not want to start your account without some free money in your pocket? So make sure to sign up using our promo code. Next game here on the slate, the Cardinals and the Cubs. At least this morning I was writing this down. There was no confirmed starting pitcher for the Cubs. It is a doubleheader. There was the rain out yesterday, afternoon game and a night game. Jose Quintana is expected to be on the mound for the Cardinals, but have you seen a confirmed or expected starting pitcher for the Cubs tonight?
No, I mean, I see Mark Leiter listed as potentially expected, but that's not confirmed.
All right. So we're going to need to circle back on that later in the day. So make sure to watch our other content today, guys. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and check out
what time the first game is.
The first game is, I think, at 3-ish. Oh no, 1:15.
Oh, okay, cool. So it'll be done, and we should have a lineup.
Yeah. Yeah, first game 115, second game 745. So it'll be done well in advance. But as of right now, we just don't know what to make of the Cardinals or the Cubs pitcher because we don't know who the Cubs pitcher is. But what we do have to talk about is Jose Quintana pitching for the Cardinals. He's been serviceable while not being great this year. And then as for the Cubs lineup, probably a little bit better today than what we would have expected just because they didn't trade Ian Happ at the trade deadline. They didn't trade Wilson Contreras at the trade deadline. The question just becomes for me when it comes to Quintana is how many Cubs players will be resting since this is the second part of a doubleheader.
Yeah, certainly depends what this lineup looks like, and I am surprised that it's potentially as formidable as it is because I for sure thought Contreras, at least one of Contreras and Happ were going to be gone. But if we do get their normal lineup, I actually don't hate this spot against Quintana because it's, I assume, going to be warm and humid in St. Louis because it's August and it always is. But Contreras at 4,700, Happ at 4K, Suzuki at 4,100. Those are all pretty reasonable price tags. If Morel's leading off with second base outfield eligibility, that's not bad. Nico Horner's not bad. So Quintana this year, 155 expected ISO to righties, only an 18% strikeout percentage. He's been lights out against lefties. But I really don't mind taking some shots at the Cubs if we get a normal Cubs lineup.
Yeah, this is one of the ones. It's just really hard to draw strong conclusions from when we don't know the starting lineup.
Actually, I think S&P's right. S&P 93 said he saw Sean Newcomb starting. I do actually think I saw that this morning and just like completely.
Let's see. Let me do a quick. And what is Sean Newcomb? There was a point in time where I really liked Newcomb, and he was a pitcher that had fantasy upside.
Yeah, Sean Newcomb will start game 2 for the Cubs.
All right, so let's look at Sean Newcomb's numbers.
Thank you for saying that because it just completely reminded me I'd seen that.
So Newcomb has only pitched out of the bullpen this year. His numbers have been absolutely miserable out of the pen, but he's been in the minor leagues as of late. So let me look at his game log. What has he done at the minor leagues? Has he been starting? Has he been pitching extended innings? Not really, although not as restricted as he was in the big leagues. So the last start that he made came at AAA. He pitched 4 innings. He had 8 strikeouts to 3 walks. So I'd say it's probably a reasonable expectation for Newcomb. His last 2 minor league outings were 4 starts. They've slowly been stretching him out. So if we are to assume Newcomb gets 4 innings, what do we make of him and what do we make of the Cardinals against him?
He's 4K flat, so he's playable. I don't know that you'll need him. I mean, the matchup sucks against the Cardinals. Obviously, we don't know exactly what lineup St. Louis is going to be running out there, but assuming that it's some sort of normal version of their lineup, it's going to be a tough spot. But 4K for a pitcher that does have decent strikeout stuff and that can go 4 innings or so is a reasonable value. It's just a matter of, is hitter pricing sharp enough? And the answer probably is no, that you need to go there as opposed to just like going to somebody like Syndergaard or Springs that can give you several more innings.
And then also, given some of the struggles that we've seen out of Newcomb, hasn't been good at the major league level this year. ERA over 11 in the minor leagues this year, 24 innings, 18 walks. He has allowed 10 runs. I think that the Cardinals, assuming that they play Arenado, Goldschmidt, they have a relatively normal lineup. This would be a pretty good spot for them against Newcomb.
Yeah, I agree. He's never been able to not walk guys. That's been his issue really forever in the major leagues. 12% career walk percentage. You know, again, he's got good strikeout stuff. 23% career strikeout percentage in the majors. 30.7% at AAA this year. But this is a really dangerous lineup. And if you're not throwing strikes, like not only are you walking people and putting guys on base, but you're most likely also working behind in counts. And there's a lot of hitters on this team that you do not want to be working 3-1 counts against because they'll do a lot of damage. So extremely high upside spot for the Cardinals. I do like them for sure. It's just a matter of potentially playing some Newcomb as well if you do end up needing some savings at pitcher.
2 games left to talk about. No, I just realized there's no West Coast games tonight. So this slate's going to be over pretty early. The latest start time is 8:10 for the Red Sox Royals game. So 2 games in the 8 p.m. time slot, or 8 p.m. Eastern time slot anyway. The next one, the White Sox and the Rangers. We have Johnny Cueto on the mound for the White Sox, and then Cole Ragans, I believe is how it's pronounced, making his season debut. Starting with the Cueto side, he's been really stellar this year for the White Sox, but just he only has a 16.9% K rate, so it's been really difficult for him to have upside for DFS purposes. Even his last start against the A's, he pitched really well. He worked deep into the game, but only had a couple of strikeouts. So there wasn't really the fantasy output there. The way I'm approaching Cueto at this point is I don't want to roster him, but I don't have all that much interest stacking against him anymore.
Yeah, pretty much the same boat for me. If he were cheaper, he's somebody that I could have seen using as like a pivot to the Springs and Syndergaard range, where you're just hoping that Springs and Syndergaard don't pitch well and Cueto gives you 6 innings, 3 strikeouts, 1 earned run, and just like beats them. But at 8,700, I mean, that's a really difficult price tag. I'd be more likely to go to Sonny Gray for the strikeout upside at the same ownership and a little bit cheaper price. So it's really tough to get to Cueto. As far as stacking against him, not really in love with that either. He's just a really difficult pitcher to talk about because if you just look at like his stuff and everything, you would think he sucks and that you would want to take bats against him. But he's just like the definition of a professional pitcher that has figured out ways to mess with hitters' timing and change speeds, even as his stuff has gotten worse throughout his career. So while he's only striking out 16.8% of hitters this year, 4.35 xFIP is reasonable, 1.08 home runs per 9, nothing crazy there. It's not that he's unhittable or anything, but a 156 expected ISO to righties, 161 to lefties, kind of just leaves it in a situation where individually, any of Semien, Seager, Heim, Lowe, Garcia look fine. Cole Calhoun's still 2K flat, but they just don't really stand out here as top plays, I don't think.
Yeah, I think we see it the same way. I have no real interest there. The other side of the game is going to be different for me. So we have Cole Ragans is making his MLB debut tonight, which always brings in all kinds of uncertainties. We don't know what the guy's pitch mix looks like. We don't know if he's going to be nervous in his first major league start. His minor league numbers this year are decent at AAA and AA for that matter. ERAs right around 3 in both of them, although a little bit of good luck involved for sure. His FIP was around 4 at both levels. Strikeout rate in AA, 31%. At AAA, 27%. Steamer projects him to be a guy with a 4.5 ERA right now in terms of his actual talent level. I really like stacking the White Sox in this spot for this reason. I have no clue what to make of Ragans, and that to me just introduces variance into the situation, and people are not rostering the White Sox right now.
Yeah, that's kind of my thinking too. I do think maybe we see the White Sox ownership come up, but I have no idea what to expect here. Ragans is certainly better than most pitchers that come up. Like normally when you just see a random name making a debut, it's just like, oh, this guy was horrible. But this guy is one of Texas's better pitching prospects. He was their first round pick in 2016. You mentioned that he had some success in the minors this year. He struck out 27% of hitters in 8 starts at AAA. He struck out 31% in 10 starts at AA. He seems good enough. And honestly, at 5,100, I don't even mind gambling on him. If you need some savings, you can throw him into that like Sean Newcomb pile where it's just like, oh, okay, if I need a cheap pitcher, I have no idea what the hell to make of this, but he's cheap and has some sort of talent. But on the other side, if the White Sox really are going to get this little ownership, and the reason I guess it would happen is that Philadelphia, Tampa Bay, Boston, those are the 3 teams ahead of Chicago in terms of top stack percentage. They're all much, much, much better values. They're all cheaper. So I think that's probably one reason you're not getting as much. And then also potentially we do just see that come up a little bit throughout the day. But Tim Anderson, Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez, Abreu, like this is an entirely right-handed lineup against a left-handed pitcher making his major league debut that we have no idea what to expect. So as long as the ownership's low, I'm certainly willing to gamble on the White Sox and just hope that they get to this guy in his first big league start.
Yeah, and the back end of the White Sox lineup sucks, but I would just be looking to stack most of the top end guys anyway. We've got a pretty healthy White Sox team right now, which has very seldomly happened this year. And there's still talent at the top of that order. The main reason this team has underwhelmed this year has been because of injuries and the fact they've played like 4 or 5 games with their core guys all together. They're healthy right now. They were one of my favorite stacks on the early slate yesterday. And even though they only scored 4 runs, it worked out because all of the production came from the guys at the top of the order. I think this is another team that makes a whole lot of sense to get to. If the slate locked right now, this would be my single entry team. They're only projected for 3% ownership, but their top stack odds are not far behind the teams that you just mentioned. Red Sox, Rays, Phillies. Sure, they're slightly behind them, but only 1.5 percentage points back, whereas they have like a fourth, a fifth of the ownership. So I love getting the White Sox as a contrarian team, especially considering that we just don't know what we're getting from Ragans at all.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. The spot ownership wise, that I'm interested to see how it plays out. I don't think you're going to see the White Sox rival Philadelphia, Tampa Bay, or Boston since they are better values. But looking at like that next set of teams where you have the White Sox, Houston, and Toronto, we have the White Sox with a 2% chance of being the top value on DraftKings, Houston at 4, and Toronto at 2. White Sox are getting 3.5% aggregate ownership. Houston's getting 9.5%. Toronto's getting 5%. I wouldn't be surprised if you see that sort of level out where like the White Sox get up to 5%, Houston comes down to 7%, Toronto stays around 5%. That would still be low enough where I'm interested in the White Sox, but I do think there's a chance that you see that level out a little bit and the White Sox ownership come up.
Yeah, and there is a good point being brought up in the chat is that Tim Anderson has been suspended. He's appealing the suspension, so I don't think he'll start serving it today. But we'll see. He has a 3-game suspension. Typically, when a player appeals, it takes a couple of days. So my current expectation, he will be in the lineup. That's not a guarantee. So it is something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah. And somebody had also asked about Luis Robert. He was activated yesterday. They held him out for precautionary reasons. So for now, assuming he plays, obviously, if he doesn't play, it does weaken the lineup a bit.
Final game on the slate to talk about Boston Red Sox, Kansas City Royals. We mentioned a couple of times over the course of the show that the Red Sox are expected to be one of the more popular offenses today. The reason is because they're going up against Kris Bubic, who has a strikeout rate under 20% this year. He has a 1.6 whip. He's giving up runs in bunches. So when it comes to the Red Sox today, I think that they are pretty unavoidable, especially with Rafael Devers back. They are picking up a good amount of ownership at 13%, but it more or less seems warranted considering how good the spot is.
Agreed. I've been playing Bubic a lot this season for reasons unknown. I really hope it stops today because the dude is bad. 17.8% strikeout percentage, 12% walk percentage, 4.75 xFIP, 1.35 home runs per 9. The Red Sox are not very good, but they do still have some good hitters in their lineup individually. JD Martinez at 4,300 looks fantastic. Bogarts looks good at 4,600. Is Devers hurt again? Because he's not in the projected lineup I'm looking at.
I think he should be playing today.
Okay, so it's just a bad lineup. But assuming Devers is in, he looks good. Don't shy away from the lefty-lefty matchup. Bubic has only struck out 11% of lefties this year while allowing a 257 expected ISO and a 454 expected WOBA over a limited sample. If you go back to last year, 290 or 220 expected ISO, 385 expected WOBA to lefties. So not like he's really good against lefties and gets lit up by righties. He's just bad in general. So Boston looks good here. Duran's cheap leading off. Pham hasn't been good for a few years, but still probably hitting toward the top of the order. Bobby Dahlbeck's going to look good at that $3,100 price tag. So I expect to get to plenty of Boston against Bubic.
By the way, the reason that Devers isn't in the project lineup, just because I know how this works, is the initial projected lineup early in the day is going to be whatever that lineup is, or whatever the lineup was last against the handedness of that pitcher.
When he was hurt.
Yeah. So yesterday they went up against Urquidy, a righty. Today, Bubic, a lefty. So it'll get manually edited later in the day, and Devers will be back in the lineup. But for now, just the projected lineup doesn't have him in because he didn't play the last time they went up against the lefty. Starting for the Red Sox, the final pitcher to talk about today is Nick Pivetta. He's going up against the Royals lineup that no longer is Whit Merrifield. They no longer have Andrew Benintendi. They still do have Salvador Perez in the lineup, so that's a dangerous catcher. But in terms of Pivetta, what are you going to be doing with him as a pitcher today where he's projected to be somewhat popular, and he's also in a price tier of pitchers that are not crazy appealing? Sonny Gray, Johnny Cueto, those are the guys priced around him. So I do think Pivetta is a better option than those pitchers, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm dying to roster him.
Yeah, I expect to get to both sides here. I think Pivetta's ownership makes sense where he's coming in at 14%. So he's a little bit more expensive than Syndergaard. He's $1,100 more expensive than Springs. He's getting about half the ownership of those guys. He's a decent enough strikeout pitcher, 22.5% strikeout percentage this year. He does have a home run problem, allowing 1.2 home runs per 9, 4.25 xFIP. The Kansas City lineup as a whole isn't great, but there are still some pretty appealing bats in there. When you have Melendez, Witt, Perez, Pasquantino 1 through 4, Nick Prado is one of the top hitting prospects in baseball. He's 2K flat. Hunter Dozier, has a little bit of pop, even though overall he's not a great hitter. So it's just a weird team where I get to them a lot, and I think the reason is because Melendez and Perez can cover a weak catcher position. Witt's always one of the best shortstops. Pasquantino is always one of the best values at for as long as he's at 2,100. So Pivetta is not the kind of pitcher where I'm going to completely shy away from getting to him, but he does still have upside here against Kansas City at a reasonable price tag.
Yep, I agree with all that. There's nothing that I really see too much differently. Anybody have questions about the early slate? I guess we could do a really brief overview of it. It's only 3 games. Do us a favor to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. As for the early slate, I'm looking through some of the pricing right now. And the pitching actually is better, I think, for the early slate than it is for the late slate. We've got Joe Musgrove at home against the Rockies. Only, once again, a 3-game slate, so aren't that many options. Musgrove against the Rockies, Clayton Kershaw, who seemingly pitches against the Giants once a week or so. Then we've got Jansen Junk. He looked great in his last start going up against Oakland. So just looking at this at first glance, if you had to prioritize one of the pay-up options on the slate between Musgrove and Kershaw, which one would it be? Or would you try to jam both of them into lineups?
I mean, ideally I get to both, but if I can get to one right now, I would say it's really close. Like looking at the ownership, Kershaw is getting a little bit less ownership. He's also $200 less expensive, and he's slightly less likely to be a top 2 pitcher. So I think he's getting a little too much of an ownership discount relative to Musgrove. I do think that Musgrove is in the better spot and should be the higher projected pitcher. So kind of depends on what the ownership of the hitters in my lineup is. But I guess given the slight gap in ownership, I would probably lean Kershaw.
And then I'm kind of surprised that we don't have Jansen Junk projected for more ownership, especially considering just how well he pitched his last time out. But the low-end pitching options kind of suck. Jacob Junis against the Dodgers, Kyle Freeland against the Padres. That's going to be a nightmare of a team to pitch against moving forward. Then it's Paul Blackburn against the Angels. I guess they're the Angels. It's a fairly weak offense. But then Jansen Junk against the A's. I think Junk looks like the best of the cheap options. Is there one of the cheaper options that you like most as an SP2?
Either Junk or Blackburn. I'm not looking to mess with Freeland against the Padres or Junis against the Dodgers. Junk does have a good matchup against Oakland. He is coming off of a good start. But overall, there's not much reason to think this guy is a good strikeout pitcher. He's 26 and a half years old. He's not a highly regarded prospect. At AAA this year in 10 starts, he struck out 20% of hitters. So I don't want to read too much into that recent start he had. Whereas Paul Blackburn isn't a very good strikeout pitcher either, but he is facing the Angels, which is kind of like free strikeouts. He has a 19% strikeout percentage, 3.83 xFIP. I think I actually like Blackburn a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't think that's unreasonable. I mean, I would have thought that Mike Trout was going to be back in the Angels lineup for now. I don't even know if he's coming back or not this year at this point. I tend to think he's probably done for the season. But the matchup for Blackburn, it is a pretty easy one, and he has been better than I expected this year. So I could see that. As far as stacks go with offenses, we've got the Padres picking up a bunch of ownership. Oakland's actually oddly picking up a whole bunch of ownership against Junk. Blackburn, also the Angels, weirdly picking up ownership against him. So we've got almost no ownership going to the Giants against Kershaw, almost no ownership for the Rockies going up against Musgrove. And then the other 4 teams are just spread out in that 22 to 25% range. Dodgers, Padres, A's, Angels. If you had to pick one team to really focus your lineups around, what would be the go-to stack?
I hate that my answer is Oakland. They're so cheap. Like, you're going to be able to play Oakland to get the 2 pitchers you want and then mix in like good one-offs around them. I'm guessing I end up getting a lot of Oakland here, and that makes me not want to play the slate, but I'm going to.
All right, you guys heard it here first. Adam is going to ship the early slate with an Oakland A's stack, and then Joe Musgrove, Clayton Kershaw as the pitchers. That does it for us today, guys. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check out all the other content that we have today. MLB Deeper Dive, MLB Live Before Lock. There's going to be some updates to the tools, stuff like Sean Newcomb getting confirmed as the starting pitcher for the Cubs. That's going to be massively impactful for the late slate in terms of what some of the ownerships and stuff look like. So check out all of that. Other than that, good luck, and I'll see you guys again tonight.